Hey guys, it's Kate, and I hope you're having a great day. I wanted to come and show you a couple of beginner watercolor techniques, and it is great practice for any budding watercolorist, and it will kind of show you some of the things you can do. So we'll make this kind of a quick video, and I have a couple of starts here because I wanted to demonstrate a couple of different things for wet on dry as well that would require a second layer. We will start with the wet and wet, and that way this can dry while we're working on our wet and dry. All right, I'm filling in my square with some Purple Lake, and it's going to be very damp, and I'm making it pretty solid. And so we're going to start there, and we're going to look at what it's like to drop color inside already damp paint. And so I'm just going to make some little blobs here with the alizarin crimson hue and just let that do its thing. As it dries and spreads out more, it'll continue to spread on the paper. So for my next one, I'm just going to fill this with water and get it nice and moist. And I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm just going to drop color right in the water. Now I'm just making sure I've got a good layer of water because we want it to be nice and damp, but not puddled. Puddled will actually impede your flow a little bit, and it will prevent too much color spread, and you can also get some cauliflowering effects. So I'm just going to dab my brush a little bit, and then I'm going to come into some of this green and mix it with whatever I've got laying around there still in my palette. And you can see it does a similar thing, but just on the background. And it almost like sends out these little tendrils. And I'm working on 100% cotton paper, by the way. But you will get similar effects with cellulose. So I'm going to mix up some more color over here and put this on my paper. And I wanted to show you what can happen when you put a lighter color into a darker color. And I'm just going to get this on here fairly evenly. Rinse my brush. And I'm going to dip into this bright yellow. And I'm going to drop that into this dark color. Now, certain colors, they will spread pretty well. I'm also going to do a little stripe here. Why not? Now you see that little bead of water that came off my brush, and that kind of will soak into the paper there. But you can also use this technique to push paint aside a little bit. Another thing you can do is mix your paint on your page. So let's say I want green, but I don't want to mix it in my tray. What I can do is get some blue and put it over there real quick and put that in my paper here. Just like that. And I'm going to grab some of this yellow. And I'm going to mix it right here on my paper. And you get kind of a neat little effect. And actually, you can even leave it a little bit like a gradient, and it will spread a little bit. So we'll see how that dries. Another thing you might want to do, and I'm going to grab a little bit of a smaller brush, is let's say you're drawing some kind of leaves or foliage. So I am going to get some of my sap green and make a nice little leaf here. And it's pretty damp. Now, what if I wanted to add a little bit of a dark shadow? Well, I can drop in some of this burnt umber. I'm sorry, I can drop in some burnt sienna and add a little bit of two-tone texture to that leaf. Now you can see, I'm gonna make a little shape here, a little square, and I'm gonna get a pretty good load of red, this alizarin crimson, and I'm gonna take it right out of the pan onto my brush. And I am gonna drop that in the center. Now you can see it starting to spread. I'm gonna keep on dropping it. And you can see as I drop it in the same spot, that spread just gets bigger and bigger and bigger because I'm adding more water and paint from my brush. And I'm going to add even more, just like that. Now I've got a bit of a puddle here from my last brush dip. If that happens, not to worry. Very gently blot it. Don't scrub the paper, and you can blot it with your brush and then wipe it off on your paper towel. And if you wanted, you can continue to add color. So I'm going to drop in some more color, but I blotted my brush. And I'm going to keep going. Now this color, given time, it will spread, maybe not full strength, but it'll spread to those borders where I originally put the water. That's if I kept dropping it in. Now if I had left it at one drop, whoops, I thought I rinsed my brush all the way. Well, we'll do it with two colors, why not? All right, we'll have a slightly pink background for this. Okay, I'm going to add a different color. How about some of this ultramarine blue? And I'll just put one little dot there, and we'll see how far that spreads. You can see my little block here is almost filled up. Okay, now I'm going to show you what happens when it's too wet, and I'm going to do this with a bit of color so that you can really see how much water I'm going to put on here. I'm going to load my brush, and I'm going to first drop in some color. I'm just dipping my brush right in my jar and spreading some of this water around. Now I have an actual puddle on my page. Now you'll see sometimes this can really work against you. So I'm going to grab some more of this Purple Lake, and I'm going to drop that in, and you can see how it's just kind of sitting there in the water. It doesn't do a lot of spreading because there's not any wicking action going on. You really have to have that wicking action to get the spread. And if that water is there, it just kind of works against itself because of the surface tension. So when your paper is damp versus soaking wet, where I've even got a puddle here on the side, it will prevent some of that spread, and it will just kind of sit there. Now, while it dries, it will have some more spread maybe, but it'll also probably have some cauliflowering. And if you don't want that, that's something you can avoid by just not getting your paper quite so soaking wet. So I'm going to let this dry, and I'm going to try to slide this to the side carefully so that I'm not going to disturb that puddle. Okay, now we have wet on dry. One of the best uses for wet on dry is for glazing and adding more colors and detail. So wet on wet, you have a lot less control. The water is just going to flow where you want it to go. Wet on dry is great for glazing for one thing. So I've got this flower started. All of these are completely dry. And we're going to start with this. So let's say I wanted to add another layer of flower leaves. Well, I can go right in between here, and this is where you get that really nice glazing effect. And you can see how it layers over the paper, and it also layers over the color underneath it. I'm going to add another one here, and let's do another one here. And you can glaze as much as you want. If I wanted to let this dry, I could, and I could come back and do even more petals, and then you get this really beautiful flower. And once you're done with your layers, then you can work on, if you wanted a dark center, you can add that in. You could also work on it with some marker or pen or whatever you like. So on this one, I have a little bit of, let's say, shrubbery or foliage, or maybe the start of a tree, but I'm putting in some leaf details. And so this is all kind of one note. It's just one single color. And if you add more colors to your painting, you're going to have more interest and more visual, I don't know, a bigger treat for the eyes. So I can go in here and let's say I want to grab some of this yellow ochre and some of this sap green and maybe a little bit of this burnt umber up there and get a nice rich color. Let me add some more green to that. And it's almost like a darker olive green, and it's going to be a different tone than this. And so I'll kind of come in and add some more color here. Maybe I just want to add some shadowy areas, just like that. And I can even double up. So let's say I wanted to add even more yellow ochre and add some yellow interest here. And you already have something just with a few little brush strokes, something much more interesting. And I might even add just a little touch of this Viridian. Now you can also do color blending wet on dry. So, and that's partly with the glazing too. So I've got this blue box here. And again, what if I wanted to do a green color? So I can dip into my lemon yellow over here. And let's just go right over that green. Or that blue. And turn it to green. And you can see I'll put my lemon yellow right next to it, and we will just let that dry as is. Okay, I took a short break and this is actually dry. So I'm going to do a third layer of glaze on that flower, because that just seems fun to me. Just like that. And why not add some more green to this little tree? And a little trunk. And we could even add another layer of glaze to our square. And make an even brighter yellow. Now let's add about a rose. This is a little bit of almost like a wet and dry, because you can get some good detail on your roses, but You can also do some really neat things with the outside. So I want to like spread this out. I can add a little bit of a damp brush and just let that come out. Just like that. And if I wanted to do a little bit more wet and wet, I can grab some of this red and drop it in a couple of spots on the inside. And let that spread too. It's a little bit too wet. How about that? So you can definitely get detail in your wet on dry, and you can mix it up a little bit with wet on wet here too. Now let me go into some of my Payne's gray that I've got here. If you want to check if your painting is wet, don't put your fingerprints on it. Just touch it with the back of your finger, and if it feels damp or cool to the touch, it's still a little wet. Now, this is slightly damp still, but I am just going to take advantage of that and let a little bit of this color spread. Now, I'm going to have a pretty dry brush, but I'm going to drop just a little color in here. And since it's just a little bit damp and not wet, and my brush is not very wet, it will control that spread just a little bit. So technically, that is another wet and wet technique. Or you might prefer to say wet and damp. And that will just have very slight spread. And I don't know, we just have a couple little leaves there. That looks pretty good. All right, I'm going to let everything dry and come back. Okay, I'm back and we are dry. So I'm going to give you a couple of close-ups. This is our glazing. That is wet and slightly damp. And we have our leaves. We have our different layers for our little tree, our rose, and our glazing. So this is where we had that second layer of yellow, and you can see it's a deeper yellow, but we have a nice sort of green shade here. So these are some of your wet on dry techniques and some of your uses. And then for wet on wet, if you remember, this is that one where we had that huge puddle of water. And so you can see like this one spread out really nicely on the damp paper because you have that wicking action going on. This one kind of stayed where it was. It did get pulled slightly, actually, when that started drying. If you remember, the big pool of water was on this side. So it kind of pulled some of that color and moisture from the other side, and then it kind of went back as it started wicking. But it's very streaky. Now, that's not to say this doesn't have a place. If you want that kind of effect, you can go for it. And this one, you can see that red that I kept dropping in and dropping in almost spread completely out, and you can see those hard edges from where my original watermark was from the brush. This leaf, you can see where that color spread out nicely, and it has a nice little gradient blend. And I meant to actually use the burnt umber, but the burnt sienna works too. It's just that different color and adding a little bit of extra interest to the leaf. So this was some drops of color on a clean water background. This is color on color. This is yellow over that Payne's gray, so you can still do some of the lighter colors over dark, and certain ones I notice with yellow a lot, it will kind of push the darker color out of the way when you're working wet and wet. And last but not least is this beautiful gradient where we mixed the blue and the yellow together in the wet and wet. And then as it continued to dry, it continued to spread a little bit, although you still have some of that clean blue color over here to the right. But it's a really nice, soft gradient. And so these are some of the effects that you can get wet and wet. And these aren't all you can do by any means, but it's just something to get you started and give you some ideas on different ways you can use your paint. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel. And the lighting just changed because my cat just jumped in the window and pulled aside the curtain. So anyway, you have a great day. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, keep creating. Bye.